Story 1. The Midnight Passenger. The city was a ghost at 3 a.m., its streets bathed in the sickly orange glow of sodium lamps. Marcus Kane had been driving for Lyft for nearly 5 years, a nocturnal creature by choice, navigating the quiet veins of the urban sprawl when most were asleep. The late-night shift suited him. Fewer cars, better tips, and a strange intimacy with the world when it felt like it belonged only to him. His 2005 Volvo, a battered relic with a cracked dashboard and a faint smell of motor oil, was his sanctuary, its quirks as familiar as an old friend. But on this particular night, something shifted in the air, a subtle disturbance that Marcus couldn't quite name. It began with a ping on his phone, a ride request from a 24-hour convenience store on the edge of town. The location was unremarkable, a fluorescent-lit outpost for insomniacs and night shift workers. But as Marcus approached, his stomach tightened. The store was dark, its neon open sign extinguished, the parking lot a desolate expanse of cracked asphalt. He slowed his car, scanning the shadows when he saw him, a figure pacing outside the shuttered storefront, cloaked in a hoodie so worn it seemed to disintegrate at the edges. The man's movements were erratic, his head jerking as if he were listening for something in the distance. Marcus's instincts screamed at him to cancel the ride, to drive away and pretend he'd never seen the request. But the app was already locked in, and a stubborn part of him refused to back down from what might just be a harmless eccentric. He pulled up, heart pounding, and unlocked the doors. The man slid into the back seat without a word, bringing with him a sour scent of sweat and stale cigarettes. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of bloodshot eyes and a face carved with hard lines. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the engine. Most passengers buried themselves in their phones or gazed out the window, but this man did neither. He stared directly at Marcus through the mirror, unblinking, his gaze a cold weight that made the driver's skin prickle. Trying to diffuse the tension, Marcus flicked on the radio, letting a soft rock station fill the void. The music had barely begun when the passenger snapped, "Turn it off!" His voice was gravelly, laced with an edge that suggested he was used to being obeyed. Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel, but he complied, the silence rushing back like a tide. He stole another glance in the mirror, and this time, the man's lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile. Minutes passed, each one stretching into eternity. Then, without warning, the passenger spoke again. "You ever pick up someone you shouldn't have?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus forced a laugh, his voice thin. "Hope not," he said, aiming for levity but landing somewhere closer to fear. The man didn't respond, just leaned back, muttering to himself in a low, incomprehensible drone. Marcus strained to catch the words, but they slipped away like smoke. The man's muttering grew louder, coalescing into a story. He claimed he'd been an Uber driver once, years ago, until a group of passengers robbed him blind, stealing his phone, his wallet, even the spare change in the console. His tone was oddly detached, almost amused, and when Marcus glanced back, that same eerie smile was plastered across his face. "Funny, isn't it?" the man said, his eyes locking onto Marcus's in the mirror. "How much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you." The words were a blade, slicing through Marcus's composure. His pulse quickened, and he gripped the wheel until his knuckles whitened. The GPS showed they were still 10 minutes from the drop-off, a destination that now felt like a mirage. The man's ramblings grew darker, veering into disjointed confessions. He spoke of mistakes, of things he didn't mean to do, his voice rising and falling like a fevered prayer. Marcus's mind raced, piecing together fragments. A closed convenience store, a man on edge, the news reports he'd skimmed about a string of robberies in the area. Was this guy running from something? Or worse, was he hunting? The situation escalated when the passenger suddenly shouted, "You missed the turn!" Marcus's heart lurched, but the GPS contradicted the claim. They were on course. Still, fear drove him to slam on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt on the empty road. "Pull over," the man demanded, his voice now a low growl. Marcus obeyed, his hands trembling as he shifted into park. For a moment, neither moved, the only sound the ticking of the cooling engine. Then headlights pierced the darkness behind them. A police cruiser rolled slowly past, its spotlight sweeping over the Volvo. The passenger ducked low, pressing himself against the seat, his breathing shallow and rapid. Marcus's mind screamed at him to flag the cop, to end this nightmare, but his body refused to move. The cruiser continued on, oblivious, and the man remained still, his eyes squeezed shut as if willing himself invisible. After an agonizing minute, the passenger sat up, his demeanor shifting. "You got lucky," he said, his voice soft but laced with menace. Before Marcus could respond, the man flung open the door and vanished into the night, swallowed by the shadows beyond the road. Marcus sat frozen, his breath coming in ragged gasps, until the reality of his escape sank in. He ended his shift then and there, driving home in a daze, the encounter replaying in his mind like a horror film on loop. Weeks later, a news article confirmed his worst fears. A convenience store 2 blocks from where he'd picked up the passenger had been robbed that night. The clerk left shaken but unharmed. The suspect's description matched the man in Marcus's back seat. Disheveled, erratic, dangerous. The realization hit like a punch. He'd been inches from a criminal, a man who could have turned on him in an instant. Marcus installed a dash cam the next day, but the memory of that night clung to him, a reminder that some passengers carry more than just baggage. Story 2. The Cabin in the Woods. Eleanor Voss had always been a city creature, thriving in the pulse of urban life, until it broke her. A traumatic event she refused to name had left her raw, her nerves frayed by the constant clamor of car horns, shouting voices, and slamming doors. Her psychiatrist diagnosed phonophobia, a rare condition that turned every sound into a physical assault, a tingling dread that coiled in her chest and never let go. The city, once her haven, became a prison of noise, and Eleanor knew she had to escape. 3 years ago, she found her salvation in a remote cabin nestled deep in Oregon's Pacific Northwest. The listing promised solitude, and it delivered. Tucked among towering pines, the cabin was a fortress of quiet, far from neighbors, traffic, or cell service. The nearest town was a 40-minute drive, and the only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt the weight of her fear begin to lift. The cabin itself was modest but sturdy, its wooden beams weathered by decades of storms, its stone fireplace a testament to its endurance. The air inside carried the comforting scent of pine and aged paper, like a library untouched by time. Eleanor settled in quickly, her days filled with remote work on her laptop and evenings spent reading by the fire. The silence was a balm, soothing the jagged edges of her psyche. She reveled in the absence of human noise, the world outside her door reduced to the gentle rhythm of nature. But solitude, she would soon learn, came with its own shadows. A week after moving in, a sharp knock shattered her peace. Eleanor froze, her heart racing as the sound echoed through the cabin. There was no doorbell, just the raw thud of knuckles on wood. She approached the door cautiously, peering through the small window beside it. Standing on the porch was an older woman, her gray hair cascading past her shoulders, her piercing blue eyes fixed on the door as if she could see through it. She carried a basket of homemade preserves, a gesture that seemed quaint but oddly out of place in the wilderness. Eleanor opened the door, forcing a smile. The woman introduced herself as Michelle, her voice clipped and matter-of-fact. She lived 10 minutes down a winding dirt path, she said, though the dense forest made the distance feel far greater. Michelle's demeanor was blunt, almost cold, her eyes scanning Eleanor with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She thrust the basket forward, leaving Eleanor no choice but to take it. "Always keep your lanterns full, your windows shut tight, and your wits sharper than your axe," Michelle said, her words delivered like a commandment. Eleanor nodded, unsettled by the cryptic warning, and retreated inside. She stood by the door, listening for Michelle's footsteps to fade, but the woman lingered on the porch for nearly a minute before finally leaving. The encounter left Eleanor uneasy, but she dismissed it as the eccentricity of a reclusive neighbor. She set the basket aside, its contents unexamined, and tried to reclaim her sense of calm. That night, a rare thunderstorm rolled in, the sky splitting with lightning and rain hammering the cabin's roof. Eleanor lit candles, curling up with a book as the power flickered. The storm's roar was strangely comforting, a natural symphony that didn't trigger her phobia. She felt safe, cocooned in her sanctuary, until another knock came, this one loud and urgent. Heart pounding, Eleanor grabbed a flashlight and peered through the window. Michelle stood there, drenched and clutching her own flashlight, her face pale and urgent. Before Eleanor could speak, Michelle blurted out, "I saw someone near your woodpile. You need to know." The words hit like a shockwave, confusion and fear colliding in Eleanor's chest. She stepped onto the porch, shining her light into the rain-soaked darkness, but saw nothing beyond the swaying trees. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. Michelle nodded, her eyes darting to the woods as if expecting an ambush. Without another word, she turned and vanished down the path, leaving Eleanor alone with her racing thoughts. Back inside, Eleanor locked the door, her mind unraveling. Michelle's story didn't add up. Her cabin was too far away to see Eleanor's woodpile, especially in a storm. Had she been on Eleanor's property? Was she lying? The questions gnawed at her, but confronting Michelle in the dark was unthinkable. Eleanor barricaded herself in her bedroom, listening as the storm began to fade. Hours later, just as exhaustion tugged at her, a sharp snap outside her window jolted her awake. A branch, she told herself, but her body refused to believe it. Creeping to the window, she peered into the moonlit night. At the edge of the woods stood Michelle, her silhouette unmistakable, her body angled away from the cabin. Eleanor's breath caught as Michelle began to turn, and she ducked below the sill, her heart hammering. When she dared to look again, Michelle was gone, leaving only the rustling trees. Sleep eluded Eleanor that night, her mind trapped in a loop of fear and suspicion. Michelle's warning, her strange behavior, it all pointed to something sinister. Just before dawn, another knock came, softer this time. Eleanor's phobia surged, the tingling in her chest unbearable. She crept to the door, peering through the window, and froze. It wasn't Michelle. A burly man with a thick beard stood on the porch, his eyes scanning the darkness. Panic seized her, and she retreated to the bathroom, locking the door and dialing 911. As she whispered to the operator, the front door shuddered under heavy blows, each one a thunderclap in her ears. The door gave way with a crash, and the sound of shattering glass and splintering wood filled the cabin. Eleanor cowered, certain she was moments from death. The destruction stopped as suddenly as it began, replaced by an eerie silence. When the police arrived, the intruder was gone, leaving behind a wrecked living room and no trace of his identity. The officers' search of the property was cursory, their attitude dismissive. Desperate, Eleanor led them to Michelle's cabin, only to find it abandoned, its windows boarded and its interior coated in decades of dust. The police confirmed no one had lived there in years, refusing to search for squatters. "Living out here's a risk," one officer said, his tone implying it was her fault. Eleanor spent one final, sleepless night in the cabin before fleeing. The experience haunted her, a puzzle with no solution. Some friends suggested Michelle was a protective spirit, but Eleanor rejected the supernatural. She believed Michelle and the man were squatters, their motives unclear but undeniably malicious. Why Michelle warned her only to lurk in the shadows remained a mystery, one Eleanor feared she'd never solve. Story 3: The Call in the Night. Luke Harper and Catherine Wells were an unlikely pair, two Ohio kids who found each other in the sun-drenched sprawl of Stanford University. Luke, from a small town outside Columbus, had dreamed of Stanford since childhood, its prestige a beacon for his ambitions. Catherine, a Cincinnati native with a quick wit and a guarded heart, shared his Midwestern roots, a bond that drew them together in a sea of Californians. Their relationship, now 3 years strong, was built on shared traditions, none more cherished than their Christmas Eve drive. Each year, they spent Christmas Eve with Luke's boisterous extended family, a night of laughter and gift-giving that spilled into the early hours. Then, just past midnight, they'd pile into Luke's beat-up sedan and drive the 2 hours to Catherine's family in Cincinnati, arriving in time for Christmas Day. The route was a network of quiet back roads flanked by snow-dusted fields and skeletal trees, the world asleep under a blanket of silence. It was their private ritual, soundtracked by Juice WRLD's emo rap anthems, the music a guilty pleasure that bound them in shared joy. Singing together, Their voices raw and unpolished, they felt invincible, the road stretching out like a promise. This past Christmas Eve began like any other. Luke's family gathering was a whirlwind of warmth, Catherine's charm winning over even his gruffest uncles. As midnight approached, they loaded the car with gifts and leftovers, the snow falling in soft, lazy flakes. The heater hummed, the music blared, and the road unfurled before them, empty and serene. Luke felt a quiet contentment, the kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Then his phone rang. The sound cut through the music, shrill and jarring. Luke glanced at the screen. An unknown number. He frowned, irritation flaring. "Probably a scam," he muttered, letting it go to voicemail. Catherine laughed, joking about call center workers toiling through the holidays. They brushed it off, the music resuming, but the moment felt tainted, a crack in their perfect night. Minutes later, the phone rang again. Another unknown number. Luke's irritation deepened, his thumb hovering over the decline button. Catherine raised an eyebrow, her expression curious but unconcerned. He ignored the call, tilting the screen toward her to show the unknown caller ID. "Weird," she said, her voice light but tinged with unease. Luke shrugged, trying to shake the growing sense of disquiet. When the phone rang a third time, Luke's patience snapped. Cursing, he grabbed the device, swiping to answer with a venomous, "Hello." His outburst startled Catherine, her body tensing beside him. He expected the robotic pitch of a scam call, but instead there was silence, broken only by faint static. Luke turned up the car's volume, straining to hear, when a man's voice spoke, calm and deliberate. "Hello, Luke." The world tilted. Luke's grip on the wheel faltered, the car swerving slightly before he corrected it. His name in that stranger's mouth was a violation, a cold finger tracing his spine. Before he could respond, the voice continued, reciting details no one outside his inner circle should know. His full name, his home address, the name of his childhood dog. Luke's mind reeled, searching for an explanation, but the voice pressed on, each word a hammer blow. Catherine's face paled, her eyes wide with fear. Luke forced himself to speak, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at him. "What do you want?" he asked. The line went quiet, the static swelling, and then the voice delivered its final strike. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for Catherine." Her name was a thunderclap, shattering Luke's composure. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth, her expression mirroring his horror. In a panic, Luke blurted, "I don't know a Catherine." "Wrong number." The man chuckled, a low, predatory sound. "She's sitting right next to you." Luke slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop on the snowy shoulder. His hands shook, his vision tunneling. He opened his mouth to speak, but Catherine moved first, snatching the phone from his lap and ending the call with a single, swift motion. Luke exploded, screaming, "Why the hell did you hang up?" Her silence infuriated him, her wide-eyed stare offering no answers. He dialed the number back, once, twice, 3 times, but it was dead, as if it had never existed. Catherine urged him to drive, her voice trembling. "I was scared," she said when he demanded an explanation. "You can't blame me." Luke wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at him. Their relationship hadn't been without its cracks, small lies, moments of evasion that he dismissed as inconsequential. Could she be hiding something? The thought was absurd, but it lingered, poisoning the air between them. They drove on in silence, the music abandoned, the magic of their tradition shattered. Luke's mind churned with questions. Who was the caller? How did he know their plans, their location? Only their families knew about the drive, and Luke was certain they'd never orchestrate such a cruel prank. The alternative, that someone was watching them, tracking them, was too terrifying to contemplate. When they reached Catherine's house, the relief Luke expected never came. The incident clung to him, a shadow that darkened the weeks that followed. They questioned their families, but no one confessed to a prank. Catherine insisted she was as baffled as he was, but Luke couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding something back. Every phone call now carried a threat, every unknown number a reminder of that voice in the night. As winter deepened, Luke's fear hardened into resolve. He began digging, checking call logs, researching phone scams, even hiring a private investigator to trace the number. The trail was cold, but Luke refused to let it go. Somewhere out there was a man who knew too much, who had targeted them for reasons unknown, and Luke was determined to find him before he called again.